You're about to deploy with this kind of shooting. Captain Ryan Cole's voice cracked across the range like dry thunder, sharp and impatient, cutting through the restless wind that swept over the open terrain as a sniper lowered his rifle, the echo of a missed shot still hanging in the air like a mistake no one wanted to own, the steel target sitting untouched at nearly 1,500 yards, small and stubborn against the pale horizon. While a ripple of tension moved down the firing line and boots shifted against gravel, the hum of equipment and low voices collapsing into a tight, uncomfortable silence, because everyone knew that wasn't just another miss, it was a warning, and Cole felt it, jaw tight, shoulders squared, eyes scanning his team like a man searching for something that should have already been there but wasn't. That was your shot, he snapped, gesturing toward the distant silhouette, and you didn't even come close. The wind twisted again, subtle but unpredictable, flipping direction in a way the digital readouts didn't quite agree with, the small weather stations blinking their neat little numbers as if reality could be boxed into clean data, but the flags downrange told a different story, snapping one way then hesitating like they couldn't decide what truth they belonged to, and that contradiction hung in the air heavier than the heat rising off the ground, distorting the view through every scope on the line, turning distance into something fluid, uncertain, alive. Pack it up if you can't read it. Cole continued, frustration bleeding into his tone now, because this wasn't supposed to happen, not here, not with his team, not with deployment orders already stamped and waiting, and somewhere behind the line, just beyond the organized tension of uniforms and gear, an old man stood quietly, hands resting at his sides, saying nothing, his presence so still it almost disappeared against the movement around him. Like he wasn't part of the scene at all, like he didn't belong on a live-fire range, where everything had a place and a purpose, yet he watched, not the people, not the commotion, but the space between, the invisible current sliding across the ground, the shimmer rising in waves from sun-baked dirt, the slight drift of dust that lifted and settled without pattern, his pale eyes tracking things no sensor could measure, and when another sniper adjusted his scope, chasing numbers that refused to settle, the old man's gaze shifted just slightly, following the path the bullet would have taken if it had ever been allowed to understand the wind it was flying through, and still, no one noticed him, not really, because attention was locked on failure, on pressure, on the quiet realization that something fundamental wasn't working, and Cole exhaled sharply, running a hand across his face before turning back toward the line. We don't move forward until someone figures this out, he said, voice lower now but heavier, carrying the weight of expectation, and in that moment, the range held its breath, the wind whispering across metal and dust, the distant target unmoved, waiting, as if it already knew that everything about to happen would change the way every man standing there understood a single shot. The numbers kept changing, but nothing was improving, and that was what unsettled them most, because every adjustment looked correct on the screens, every calculation lined up, and yet the bullets refused to follow the logic, drifting just enough to miss, just enough to remind everyone that something out there could not be reduced to clean data, and Captain Cole saw it in their faces, the hesitation, the second-guessing, the quiet erosion of confidence that no one would admit out loud. Run it again, he ordered, sharper this time, as another shooter settled behind his rifle, breath controlled, finger steady, the scope trained on the distant steel that shimmered in the heat, the wind brushing across the range in uneven pulses that felt more like shifting layers than a single direction, and when the shot finally broke, it carried clean, controlled, technically perfect, and still it missed, the impact kicking up dust just off target, close enough to frustrate, far enough to matter, and a low murmur spread through the line before dying quickly under Cole's glare. That is not equipment failure, he said, voice low, dangerous now, that is you not understanding what is right in front of you, and no one answered, because deep down they knew he was right, but none of them could explain what they were missing, and behind them, the old man shifted his weight slightly, boots pressing into gravel with a soft crunch that went unnoticed, his eyes still fixed downrange, not on the target itself but on the invisible movement between here and there, the way the air bent light into subtle distortions, the way the dust lifted in small spirals and then flattened as if pressed down by something unseen, and when he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, almost lost beneath the wind. You are chasing the wrong wind. A few heads turned, more out of irritation than curiosity, and Cole glanced over his shoulder, narrowing his eyes at the interruption, taking in the worn jacket, the still posture, the complete lack of urgency, and something about it immediately bothered him. Excuse me, Cole said, stepping toward him, the authority in his stride unmistakable, and the old man did not react to the tone, did not adjust his stance, did not offer any sign that he felt out of place. "You are reading one wind," he continued calmly, "but the bullet does not fly through one." A few of the younger Marines exchanged looks, unsure whether to laugh or stay quiet, because the statement did not fit into anything they had been trained to expect, and Cole let out a short, humorless breath. "We have advanced instrumentation for that," he replied, tapping the small device strapped to his wrist. "We are not guessing out here." And for the first time, the old man's gaze shifted from the range to Cole, steady, clear, and unhurried. "No," he said simply, "you are trusting something that cannot see everything." The words hung there, not confrontational, not defensive, just stated like a fact that did not require agreement, and that only made it worse, because Cole felt the challenge in it. Without the usual tone of defiance, and that kind of calm was harder to dismiss. "You think you see something my team does not?" Cole asked, a faint edge creeping into his voice now, the kind that signaled a line had just been drawn, and the old man did not hesitate, did not soften. "I do not think," he said, eyes drifting back toward the distant target. "I know." And somewhere down the line, a young lance corporal named Ethan Brooks felt a tight knot form in his chest, because he had been watching the heat shimmer all morning, watching the way it bent and shifted in ways the numbers did not match, and for the first time, someone had put words to what he could not explain, and that realization settled heavy, because it meant the problem was not the gear, and it was not the training, it was something else entirely, something older, something quieter. And as the wind slid across the range again, unpredictable and patient, it felt less like a variable and more like a test waiting for someone who actually understood it. Captain Cole studied him for a long second, the wind tugging lightly at his uniform as if even the air itself was waiting to see what he would do next, and there was something about the old man's stillness that did not fit, not in a place built on hierarchy and precision, not in a moment that demanded answers backed by credentials and rank. "You know what?" Cole said finally, a thin edge of challenge sharpening his tone. "If you are so certain, then step up and show us." A few heads turned more fully now, attention shifting away from the failing shots and locking onto this unexpected turn, because what had started as quiet interference was now becoming something else, something public, and the old man did not move right away, did not rush to accept or decline. He simply looked at the range again, as if measuring something no one else could see, and then he stepped forward, slow, deliberate, each footfall steady against the gravel, and that alone drew more eyes than any argument could have, because there was no hesitation in it, no performance, just quiet intent, and Cole gestured toward an unused rifle resting on the bench. "Modern, calibrated, precise. Take it," he said, folding his arms, the faintest hint of a smirk returning as if this was about to prove a point he already believed, but the old man did not reach for it, his gaze passing over the weapon like it was not the one he needed, and instead his attention shifted to the far end of the bench where an older rifle rested, wood stock worn smooth with age, the surface marked by years that no amount of maintenance could erase, and a few of the Marines exchanged glances, recognizing it more from history than experience. "That one is not part of this rotation," Cole said, a note of irritation slipping in, but the old man spoke before he could continue. "It will do," and there was no request in the words, only certainty, and that again unsettled something in the space between them, because authority usually demanded recognition, but this man moved as if it did not apply, and Cole exhaled through his nose, giving a short nod. "Fine," he said, stepping back, "but do not expect adjustments, do not expect spotters correcting for you. You get one shot." The emphasis landed hard, clear, final, and a small circle began to form, not ordered, not official, but drawn by the gravity of the moment, Marines shifting slightly to get a better view, the low murmur fading as anticipation replaced frustration, and Ethan Brooks felt it more than most, that strange tightening in the chest that came when something important was about to happen, even if no one could yet explain why. And the old man reached the bench, his hands moving with quiet familiarity as he lifted the rifle, not hurried, not hesitant, just practiced, the weight settling into his grip like something remembered rather than handled, and for a brief moment the range seemed to narrow, the wind still moving, the heat still rising, but everything else pulling inward toward that single point where the rifle met his shoulder, and Cole watched closely now, no longer dismissive, not yet convinced, but aware that this had shifted beyond a simple challenge, and as the old man adjusted his stance, not by numbers, not by instruction, but by feel, by something internal and precise, the flag's downrange flickered again, uneven, contradictory, and the air between here and there shimmered with layered motion, and no one spoke, because suddenly, no one was certain what they were about to witness. The rifle settled into his shoulder as if it had been waiting for him, not the other way around, the worn wood fitting against his frame with a familiarity that no modern adjustment system could replicate, and his fingers moved across it lightly, not checking, not calibrating, but remembering, tracing the small imperfections carved into the surface by time, and when his thumb paused near a shallow gouge along the stock, something in his posture stilled even further, as if a part of him had stepped somewhere else for just a moment, the wind brushing across the range carrying a faint scent of heated earth that blurred into something older, heavier, and for a brief instant the shimmer in the air was not just heat but memory. Rain cutting through dense green, the weight of breath held steady while the world moved unpredictably around him, the quiet understanding that one shot could mean everything without needing to say it out loud, and then it was gone, the present snapping back into place with the same quiet precision, his grip tightening just enough to bring the rifle fully into alignment, and behind him the small circle of Marines leaned in without realizing it, drawn by something they could not quite name. Because this was no longer about proving someone wrong, it felt different, heavier, like they were standing at the edge of something they had not been taught, and Captain Cole watched closely, his arms still crossed but his expression no longer carrying the same easy confidence, because the way the old man moved did not match hesitation or guesswork, it matched certainty, and that unsettled him more than defiance ever could. "Clock is running," Cole said, though his voice had lost some of its earlier sharpness, replaced by something more controlled, more deliberate, and the old man did not respond, did not acknowledge the pressure, he simply breathed, slow and even, his eyes moving not just to the target but through the space between, reading the invisible layers that twisted and overlapped across the 1,500 yards, the near wind brushing left to right against his cheek, the mid-range current shifting subtly and the shimmer rising off the ground, the far flag snapping in a direction that did not match either, each one telling a different story. And instead of forcing them into one solution, he accepted all three, letting them settle into place like pieces of something already understood, and Ethan Brooks felt it again, that quiet realization building stronger now, because for the first time all day, someone was not fighting the wind, they were listening to it, and that difference changed everything. And the old man adjusted his stance by inches, not measured, not calculated, but precise in a way that came from repetition beyond counting, the rifle lifting just slightly, then settling, his breathing sinking with the subtle movement of the air itself, as if he had found a rhythm inside the chaos, and around him the range grew quieter without anyone giving the order, conversations fading, boots stilling, even the constant background noise of equipment seeming to fall away, until all that remained was the soft whisper of wind across open ground and the faint creak of wood and metal held steady in practiced hands, and Captain Cole realized, without fully understanding why, that this was no longer his moment to control, and that realization sat heavy, unfamiliar, as he watched the old man's finger rest along the trigger, not tense, not rushed, just waiting, and the entire base seemed to hold its breath with him. Time stretched into something thin and fragile, the kind that could snap if anyone dared to breathe too loudly, and yet the old man did not rush it, did not chase the moment, he let it come to him, his finger resting against the trigger with a patience that felt almost out of place in a world built on urgency, and the wind continued its quiet conversation across the range, brushing past in layers that refused to align. Near wind sliding left to right against his cheek, mid-range currents drifting in a slow, deceptive swirl, and far downrange the flag snapping in sharp defiance of both, each one telling its own truth, each one demanding to be understood on its own terms, and instead of forcing them into a single answer, he held them all at once, letting them settle into a balance that only existed for a fraction of a second, and Ethan Brooks felt his pulse in his throat now, not from fear but from the growing certainty that whatever happened next would not be something he could explain later, because this was not technique alone, it was something deeper, something built over years that could not be measured in training hours or data points, and Captain Cole stood motionless, arms still crossed but grip tightening slightly against his sleeves, because control had shifted without permission, and he could feel it even if he did not understand it. The authority he carried suddenly feeling less solid in the face of something that did not need to assert itself to be undeniable, and the old man exhaled slowly, the movement barely visible, his body settling into stillness so complete it almost disappeared, the rifle becoming an extension of that stillness rather than a tool he held, and for a brief instant the entire range seemed to align with him, the shifting winds pausing just enough, the shimmer steadying into a pattern that only he seemed to recognize, and then his finger moved, not pulling, not jerking, just a smooth, deliberate pressure that felt inevitable rather than forced, and the sound that followed was clean and sharp, cutting through the silence without echoing chaos. A single moment released into distance, and then nothing, no immediate reaction, no confirmation, just a quiet suspension as everyone waited, eyes locked on the far target that stood unchanged for a heartbeat, then another, and then a faint metallic note. Carried back across the open ground, soft but unmistakable, and it landed heavier than any shout could have, because it was not just a hit, it was the answer to everything that had come before it, and no one moved, no one spoke, the entire line frozen in that realization, the frustration, the doubt, the failed attempts all collapsing into a single undeniable truth, and Ethan Brooks felt the air leave his lungs in a slow, silent release as his eyes widened, because he knew exactly how difficult that shot had been, knew how many variables had been working against it, and yet it had been done with a calm that made it look effortless, and Captain Cole lowered his arms without realizing it, the tension in his posture shifting into something else entirely, something quieter, something closer to respect but not yet ready to admit it, and the old man did not celebrate, did not look back, he simply remained where he was. The rifle still in his hands, his gaze steady downrange as if the result had never been in question, and around him the base remained silent, not from command, not from discipline, but from something deeper, something that did not need to be spoken to be understood. The sound of the impact faded, but the silence it left behind did not. It settled over the range like something heavy and deliberate, pressing down on every man standing there until even the smallest movement felt out of place, and for a moment no one reacted because there was nothing left to question. The shot had already answered everything, and Ethan Brooks lowered his spotting scope slowly, his hand steady but his thoughts racing, replaying what he had just seen, not the trigger pull, not the sound, but everything that led up to it, the way the old man had read the air like it was something alive, something that could not be reduced to numbers on a screen, and that realization stayed with him, deeper than the shot itself, because it meant there was a level of understanding none of them had been taught, and Captain Cole stood still, eyes fixed on the distant target as if expecting it to change, as if there might still be some explanation that fit within the rules he trusted, but nothing moved, nothing shifted, the steel remained exactly where it had been. The only difference now was what everyone understood about it, and slowly, almost reluctantly, Cole turned his head back toward the old man, his expression no longer carrying irritation or challenge, just a quiet, controlled focus, the kind that came when something forced you to reconsider what you thought you knew, and the old man lowered the rifle with the same calm precision he had raised it, no urgency, no display, just a simple motion that ended as cleanly as it had begun, and he set it back on the bench without ceremony, his hand lingering for a fraction of a second on the worn wood before letting go, and that small detail did not go unnoticed by Brooks, because it looked less like someone putting down a tool and more like someone returning something that mattered, and the wind continued to move across the range, unchanged, unpredictable, still shifting in ways that had caused every failure before, and yet now it felt different, not because it had changed, but because their understanding of it had, and that shift was quiet but undeniable, and one of the younger Marines opened his mouth as if to say something, then stopped, the words dying before they formed, because there was nothing that would not sound smaller than what had just happened, and Cole finally took a step forward, slow, deliberate, the gravel crunching under his boots echoing louder than it should have in the stillness, and he stopped a few feet from the old man, close enough now to study him properly, to look past the worn jacket, the unremarkable posture, the lack of insignia or recognition, and for the first time he seemed to understand that none of that had ever mattered. "Where did you learn that?" Cole asked, his voice lower now, stripped of the edge it had carried before, and the old man looked at him briefly, not dismissive, not proud, just steady. "A long time ago," he said, and that was all, no explanation, no story, just a simple truth that did not need to be expanded, and Cole held his gaze for a moment longer, searching for something more, some detail that would make sense of it, but there was nothing there except quiet certainty, and behind them, Brooks made a decision without fully realizing it, his hand moving to his pocket as he stepped back slightly, pulling out his phone with careful discretion, because something about this did not feel finished, it felt like the beginning of something larger, something that someone above them needed to know, and as he turned away just enough to shield the screen, his thumb moved quickly, scrolling through contacts until he found the number he had only been told to use in situations that mattered, and as the call began to ring, the wind carried across the range once more, unchanged, but now, no longer misunderstood. The call connected on the second ring, and Ethan Brooks turned slightly away from the line, lowering his voice instinctively even though no one was paying him attention anymore, because all eyes were still locked on the old man standing near the bench. "Sir, this is Lance Corporal Brooks at Range Delta," he said quietly, choosing each word with care. "I believe we have a situation you need to be aware of." There was a pause on the other end, not long, but measured. The kind of silence that meant the person listening understood the weight behind the tone. "Go ahead," the voice replied, calm, controlled, and Brooks glanced back over his shoulder, watching as Captain Cole stood facing the old man, the tension between them no longer sharp but unresolved, something quieter and heavier taking its place. "We have an unidentified civilian on the range," Brooks continued, "no credentials, no clearance that I can verify. But he just made a 1,500-yard shot under full variable wind conditions, no spotter corrections, no digital input." Another pause, longer this time, and Brooks could almost feel the shift through the line. "Repeat that," the voice said, and Brooks did, more precisely now, including the conditions, the failed attempts, the way the shot had been taken, not as a guess but as a certainty, and when he finished, the silence that followed carried a different kind of weight, one that did not belong to confusion but to recognition. "Stay where you are," the voice said finally, sharper now. "Do not escalate, do not remove him. I am notifying command." The line clicked dead before Brooks could respond, and he lowered the phone slowly, a subtle tension settling into his chest because whatever he had just triggered was already moving beyond his level, and back on the line. Captain Cole took another step closer, his posture no longer defensive, no longer dismissive, but not yet fully open either, caught somewhere in between as he tried to reconcile what he had just witnessed with everything he believed about control and training. "You have done this before," Cole said, not a question this time, more like a statement he was testing out loud, and the old man did not answer immediately, his gaze drifting once more toward the distant target as if the conversation itself was secondary. "A few times," he said after a moment, simple, understated, and that answer landed differently than anything else had, because it did not carry pride or exaggeration, just quiet truth. And around them, the Marines remained still, the earlier frustration replaced by something closer to respect, though none of them would have used that word yet, not out loud, not without understanding who they were looking at. And the wind moved again across the range, lifting dust in soft, uneven currents that twisted and fell away, and this time, more than one set of eyes followed it differently, not just seeing movement, but trying to read it, trying to understand it the way the old man had, and that shift, small as it was, marked the beginning of something none of them had expected when the day began. And in the distance, beyond the range and the low hum of base activity, the faint sound of approaching engines began to rise, subtle at first, almost lost beneath the wind, but steady, growing. And though no one had yet acknowledged it, the air itself seemed to tighten once more, as if the moment was not over, only changing shape. The distant hum grew into a defined presence, low and steady, rolling across the base with a kind of authority that did not need to announce itself, and one by one, heads began to turn, not out of curiosity, but recognition, because that sound did not belong to routine movement, it belonged to something higher, something deliberate, and Captain Cole straightened slightly without realizing it, his posture adjusting instinctively as the weight of command shifted somewhere beyond his immediate control, and Ethan Brooks felt it too. The quiet confirmation that his call had reached exactly where it needed to go, and whatever was coming now was already in motion, the wind continuing its restless movement across the range, lifting loose dust into thin spirals that twisted and flattened against the ground, the same wind that had confounded every calculation earlier now moving freely, unchanged, as if unaware that it had just been understood. And the old man stood where he was, hands relaxed at his sides, his attention no longer fixed on the target but not on the approaching sound either, as if neither required his focus anymore, and that calm only deepened the tension around him, because everything else was shifting while he remained exactly the same. And as the vehicles came into view at the far edge of the range, dark shapes cutting through the light, the low rumble of engine settling into a controlled stop, the atmosphere tightened again, not chaotic, not loud, just precise, the kind of order that followed rank without needing to speak it aloud, and a door opened, then another, movements sharp and efficient. And the Marines along the line instinctively adjusted their stance, shoulders squaring. Conversations dying completely, because even before the figure stepped fully into view, they knew this was not a routine arrival, and when he did appear, the recognition moved through the line like a silent command. General Marcus Whitaker, his presence unmistakable, not because of volume or force, but because of the way everything around him seemed to align the moment he entered the space, and Captain Cole snapped to attention without hesitation. The shift immediate, automatic, his earlier authority now replaced by something higher, something absolute, and Whitaker's gaze moved across the range once, taking in the line, the rifles, the distant target, and then it settled on the old man, and for a brief moment, nothing else existed in that space between them, no rank, no structure, no explanation, just recognition, and it showed in the smallest change, the tightening of Whitaker's expression, the way his posture shifted not forward, but grounded, as if something long understood had just been confirmed, and he stepped forward, not rushed, not dramatic, but direct, each step measured against the gravel until he stood a few feet from the old man, and the entire base seemed to hold its breath again, waiting, not for a command, but for something else, something quieter, and Whitaker spoke, his voice calm, steady, carrying without needing to rise, "You should not have been left standing out here," and the words landed differently than anyone expected, not as correction, not as command, but as acknowledgement, and Captain Cole felt it immediately, the shift in meaning, the realization that this was not about protocol being broken, but about something far more important having been overlooked, and the old man met the general's gaze without hesitation, without formality, just the same quiet steadiness he had carried from the beginning, and for a moment longer, no one moved, because what was happening now did not fit into any training they had ever received, and the wind moved once more across the range, softer now, almost unnoticed, as if even it understood that something had just changed beyond calculation. General Whitaker held the moment without rushing it, his eyes steady on the old man as if confirming something long known rather than discovering it for the first time, and then, with a quiet precision that carried more weight than any command, he straightened fully and raised his hand in a crisp, deliberate salute, the motion clean, unmistakable. And for a fraction of a second no one else moved because the meaning had not yet caught up with what they were seeing, a four-star general saluting a man with no visible rank, no insignia, no introduction, and then it landed, heavy and undeniable, and the entire line reacted as one, boots shifting, hands rising, posture snapping into alignment as every Marine on that range followed suit, the silence deepening into something almost tangible, not empty, but full, filled with recognition, with respect that did not need to be explained. And Captain Cole felt it hit harder than anything that had come before, the realization settling in with a clarity that left no room for doubt, because this was not about a single shot, it was about who had taken it, and he brought his own hand up a half-second later, the movement automatic but the understanding behind it new, heavier, earned. In an instant that rewrote everything he thought he knew about authority, and the old man returned the salute slowly, not out of obligation, but acknowledgement, his motion just as steady, just as precise, and when his hand lowered, the range remained still, no one breaking formation, no one speaking, because this was not a moment to fill with words, and Whitaker stepped closer, his voice lower now, meant only for the space between them but heard by everyone all the same. "They should have recognized you," he said, not as a criticism, but as a statement of fact, and the old man gave the smallest shake of his head, almost dismissing the idea entirely. "They were doing their job," he replied, calm, even, and that answer carried its own kind of weight, because it held no resentment, no need for correction, only quiet acceptance, and Whitaker studied him for a moment longer, then nodded once, a gesture that seemed to close something unseen, and he turned slightly, his gaze moving across the line of Marines, each one still at attention, each one understanding now that they had just witnessed something far beyond a training exercise. "Learn from this," Whitaker said, not raising his voice, not needing to. "Not everything important can be measured, and not everyone important will tell you who they are." The word settled into the space like something meant to last, not just for the day, but for everything that would follow, and as he stepped back, the tension that had held the range together began to ease, slowly, carefully, like something being released rather than dismissed, and the wind moved again across the open ground, softer now, carrying dust in gentle lines that no longer felt chaotic, because they had been understood, and Captain Cole lowered his hand last, his posture still straight but his expression changed, quieter, more aware, his gaze lingering on the old man for a moment longer before shifting out toward the distant target, and this time, he did not see a problem to solve, he saw a lesson already given, and as the old man turned to leave, his steps just as steady as when he arrived, there were no announcements, no recognition spoken aloud, only the silence that followed him, deep and lasting, the kind that did not come from command, but from respect, and somewhere in that silence, Something had changed for every man who stood there, something they would carry long after the wind moved on, because some lessons were not taught, they were witnessed, and never forgotten.